Hey, I'm Stacy with New Creations by Stacy, and welcome to the Blending Basics Plus workshop. So you guys, I wanted to include everything from a start to finish with this. But of course, as far as live time goes, we just didn't have enough live time for everything. So I want to include a prep video so that you can know exactly where to start with your piece and how to get it ready, how to know what type of primer you need, or if you even need primer. So we're gonna start, like I said, from the very beginning here. So this is actually how I got this piece. I haven't cleaned it, I haven't done anything with it. And of course, the first thing I'm gonna do is remove any hardware. You don't have to remove the hardware, you can paint over it. Generally speaking, I almost always remove the hardware. The only time that I do paint over it is if it's a situation where maybe one of the screws is stripped and I would have to drill through it or do a lot of extra work. In that case, I typically will leave the hardware on. It depends on the hinges as far as how old the piece is. Some extremely antique furniture, the hardware actually doesn't remove. It's on bent pins. So in that case, I will go ahead and leave the hardware on and paint it as well. Here on this particular piece, I'm not going to remove the hinges. It doesn't really make a big difference as far as those are concerned. You can remove them, but if you do decide to, you want to make sure that you label the hinges and put them back in exactly the same location, because even the slightest shift in the tightness of the screws or anything like that can cause you to have an issue with cabinet doors. So we're just going to go ahead and get started here. Get my drill out. Sometimes I do use a drill. In some cases, I'll just use a screwdriver. It just depends on what's easiest. In this case, I think it's just easier to do it by hand. I don't have to do a lot of hardware. So we're just going to remove these. Just going to remove these screws. There we go. And I'll leave the screw in there for now. It's not a big deal. One thing you want to be aware of when you do something like this, in this case, this is a drawer that sits inside the piece. So if I push it all the way in, I'm going to have a hard time getting it back out. Typically, I'll either take a longer screw and just put it through so I have a tiny little knob here, or even some of the hex tools that have the little hook on the end, just stick those through. I didn't bring one out here with me, so I'm just gonna hopefully remember not to close that. If you do close it, you can just use sometimes a flathead screwdriver or like a paint scraper just on both sides. You can kind of jiggle it out enough to be able to pull it. So I'm gonna pop you down now, and we're gonna work on these bottom cabinets. This piece does have some wiring on it, so I'm gonna end up taking that out. And in the next bonus video here, we'll actually go ahead and show you how we're gonna fill all that in with Dixie dirt. This is kind of in here a little bit tight, but I've got it loosened up. So I like to put my hardware all together in a plastic bag. Usually it's a gallon size, but this is just a little nightstand or bedside table, so it'll all fit right in here. Look how pretty that hardware is. We're going to do some things with the hardware as well. And some of you guys may not need this, but if you're new to furniture painting, these little tips and tricks are always helpful. want to be careful when you're removing the hardware on old furniture because it is really easy to strip it sometimes as well. So just keep that in mind. So that little wire section fell right out. I'm not labeling these boards. I can tell they are a little warped, but not a huge deal. And I have the outline of the stain, so I'll know that'll exactly line up for each door. If you do remove the hinges, which I'm not in this case, but so this one is actually stripped. So that's going to be a little bit different here. I do want these off because I want that wire off. So I may have to just drill this out. Let me get this. I just told you guys to be careful of that. Get this one off and let's see. Sometimes you can actually pull it right over. I don't think I'm going to be able to in this situation. So what I've done is I've got a couple drill bits here and we're going to go ahead and fix that. But before we do, I also grabbed, I couldn't find my hex tools. So I just grabbed a Gorilla hook here. These will work as well. This one has a screw that got stuck in there. There we go. So you just run them through. And this other side creates kind of a little hook. And that'll work just so that I can make sure I can get the drawer open and closed and it doesn't get stuck in there. I will want to switch this over though to my tools before I start painting. That's just kind of inconvenient. You could probably bend them out though if that's all you had. All right, so let's go ahead and we're going to go back to this door here. And what I'm going to actually do, I've got a bit here that's just slightly bigger than the head of the screw. And I'm just going to go ahead and see if I can just drill the head of that screw off. And then I should be able to pull this board right over it. So you should definitely probably wear safety goggles when you do this, because you can get little bits of metal that will fly. I think I'll be okay here, but actually, well, I still need to drill that out because I still want to make sure. So there's really two things I could do at this point. I was able to drill it down enough so that I could slide this around and actually get the wire grate out. And it would be fine if I screwed this back in and just worked on it all the way together. But I'm going to go ahead and take it off because I want to replace that screw out. I am, since I got the wire out though, going to go ahead and switch to a bit that is more appropriate to the size of the actual screw itself. And I'm just going to drill right through that so that I can get this all the way off. I've taken off quite a bit ahead of the head of the screw though. Also, you do need a bit that will drill through metal. So you do want to keep that in mind. So here we go. I think I'm going to be able to get this off now. I just got to work it around a bit. And then I've got some needle nose pliers because I still have part of the screw sticking out. So we're just going to go ahead and see if I can actually unscrew it this way. And it is coming out. It'll just take a bit. See if I can get a grip on this straight on. Perfect. All right, so there we go. We've got that off and out now. I'll be able to go right back in with another screw. Drilling this out doesn't damage that hole at all, so there's nothing else that you have to do there. I don't generally take these magnets off. I just usually paint over them. It doesn't affect their effectiveness or anything else by painting over them or not. So now that we've got all the hardware off and everything out of here, we are going to go ahead and clean it. That is always the next step, always the first step before you paint anything you do, or do really any sanding, anything like that. You want to clean it. And you want to clean it because you do not want, first of all, you see all these little dots here of like dirt. If I would just put my paint straight over that, over time, that dirt's adherence, all my paint adheres to is the dirt. And over time, that's going to loosen, move around, and your paint is going to start to peel or kind of chip off in those areas. So you definitely want to make sure it's clean, that it's free of any grease, because your paint won't necessarily stick to that. And of course, there are products used specifically to prep your piece to paint. So the Dixie Belle product that we use is White Lightning. And let me just find White Lightning from Dixie Belle. It is a TSP base. It is specifically made to clean your piece. It is going to be a bit of a deglosser. It's not a heavy deglosser, but it will do a little bit of deglossing, and it's also just generally going to remove any grease, grime, dirt, dust, anything on your piece, including like if you have paint specks or something like that. When you scrub, this will take those off as well. There are some other products on the market, like this is a TSP based cleaner that came from Lowe's years and years ago. This White Lightning will make a total of 16 gallons. It is concentrated. This is concentrated as well, but it only makes 4 gallons, and it's about twice the price of the White Lightning. So this is definitely the better value. Some people do use Crud Cutter, but again, value-wise, White Lightning is definitely the best. And it's the best cleaner as well. Well, I mean, there's other equivalent cleaners. Like I said, this TSP base formula will work, or like Crud Cutter or something like that. But like I said, they are equally as good as this. This is definitely the best value. So with that being said, it is concentrated. 2 tablespoons of this is equivalent to, this will make 16 gallons. You use 2 tablespoons per gallon of water. I like to mix mine up in a Windex, just an old Windex container. This is half a gallon here. I've just filled it with warm water. And all I'm going to do is just put a tablespoon in here, since this is a half gallon size. This is a half tablespoon, by the way. This I do measure. Sometimes I do add a little bit extra, especially if I'm getting ready to do a really nasty piece. Normally I have a funnel as well, but in this case, so I actually have this plastic bag. I could use it as a funnel. In this case, I'm just going to spill a little bit. So I'll really heat this next scoop up, or I'll just put a little extra in. But it is better if you funnel it in. I would normally show you me dunking it in, but put a little bit extra because I know I've spilled some here. So I put about 1 1/4 tablespoons in for this half gallon mix. Just gonna put the lid on. You can see it turn the water kind of cloudy. Just gonna shake it up really, really well. So now, if you don't, I can serve mine this way. You'll see how I do it. The directions on the label here will tell you to put 2 tablespoons in a gallon bucket, and then you just use a rag and clean your piece that way. I do not do that. One, I like to conserve it. I think it's a waste, but not only that, I don't like to dunk my especially if you're cleaning a particularly nasty piece, I don't like to keep dunking my dirty rag back into my bucket. I guess you could clean it in between, but that's just a lot. So once I have this mixed up, I just put it into, I have a bottle that is labeled for TSP. This is just from the Dollar Tree, just a little squirt bottle. And I'm just gonna pour, normally I use a funnel, but I'm just gonna pour this in here, fill up my bottle. So this that I mixed up will make about 1.5 to 2 of these bottles. And that's it, you guys. That's super easy. I don't have to mix this very frequently. And using it this way goes a long, long ways. I do a lot of furniture, and one of these little jars will last me at least a year. And I use it very liberally, you'll see. So I do this, by the way, before I do any sanding on the top or anything like that. You want to clean your piece. You don't want to sand all the nastiness that's already there right into your piece. Not to mention, if you have that really thick grease buildup, you can, you know, you're not going to really be able to, you're just going to get that into the wood itself. And it's not going to come off. By the way, this piece does not have any of that grease buildup, but if you do have it, I normally clean that by spraying it really liberally with the TSP, and then I use just like a little paint scraper and go along and scrape that off. I'm not doing that in this situation because I don't have that issue. So here's my white lightning. I'm going to start off by just spraying everything down here on the front. I'm going to move these doors. And you can see I really soak it, and it still goes a long way. Sometimes when I like to clean outside because I do soak it so much, but sometimes when you are cleaning outside, the sun will dry it very, very quickly. So you either want to work in small sections or just work as fast as you can. So this piece isn't super, super dirty, but if I had a lot of like nasty stuff built up in there, I would be using a toothbrush just to kind of scrub that area out. But as it is, I don't really need to do that. I am just using a scrubby here from the Dollar Tree, and that's all this piece is going to need. So you can see how fast that's drying out. And I will take this drawer out and clean inside of that lip as well. But first I just want to get the drawer cleaned while it's on here. So I did have a little bit of paint that was down here. I was able to scrub that right off. So now that I've scrubbed that down, I'm just going to use a paper towel. You can see the residue that's left up here. Normally I just use this paper towel to take off anything that's still wet. It'll remove a lot of that. In this case, the sun is drying it so quickly that I really didn't have the chance to do that up here, but that's fine because of course the next step after I clean it with all of this is we're gonna rinse it off. So I'm going to go ahead. You want to clean everything that is going to get me paint. This is a finished inside, so I will be doing some work in here as well, probably a little decoupage and painting. So I want to make sure that I get it cleaned out also. Just want to make sure I scrub into these corners really well and along this line because that's a place where dirt tends to sit. And I do spray those down pretty heavily so that I can really get that loosened up. Like I said, if it was really bad, I would use a toothbrush to get in there. but it's fine how it is. The inside doesn't tend to accumulate as much dirt and dust, so this is really easy. I don't have any nasty buildup. It's mainly just washing it down here. So I normally clean the whole thing in TSP, and then I go back and rinse it afterwards. And I do that because a lot of times you can have some overspray or something like that. If you've already rinsed a section, you could end up still spraying more TSP on it, or white lightning. So while you're actually cleaning the piece too, I'm typically looking, is there any areas that need to be filled? Is there anything like a deep gouge or anything like that that would show up later after I paint it? I'm just kind of taking note of any areas like that, because I will fill that in with Dixie mud prior to prior to priming or painting. Actually, usually I'll prime first, but you can go either way with that. So this still has a factory finish on it, so the cleaning is going very easily. But if you are cleaning something where the factory finish is worn down in a lot of areas and you have a lot of raw wood, you don't really nearly have to scrub as much. But it will take, because you need to wait for this step for it to completely dry once you're done. If it is raw wood, it's going to take a little bit longer to dry, and you definitely want to make sure you allow it time to dry prior to starting to paint. So before I get up to do the top, I'm just going to go ahead and pull out this drawer here. Now, I don't normally, I'll pick, there's some, I don't know what that is. Oh, it's like a little fuzzy ball or something. Just wanted to make sure it wasn't a wild animal. That has happened before. Anyway, I may get a vacuum and clean out in here. This piece is it's really pretty clean. I don't even think I need to vacuum it back there. But if it's really nasty, I will do that. If it's a very old piece, sometimes I'll condition the inside with Big Mama's butter. That really doesn't happen till the very end though. And the reason I'm doing this here is I will be painting inside this lip, so I definitely want to ensure that this is clean. Anytime your drawer sits inside, you definitely want to do this. You also want to make sure at this stage that you have plenty of room for your drawer to slip and slide in, even after it has a layer or two of paint on it. Otherwise, because if that's something I don't need to resolve anything, that's fine here, but it will distress and wear in those areas. So if you're not doing a distressed piece and your drawer slides all the way in, but it's a very tight fit prior to painting and it doesn't take much, you just would want to sand down this area so your drawer would slip in really easily. And you just have that minuscule extra amount of space that you need for the paint. So we've cleaned that. Now I want to go ahead and clean our little boards that we took out of here. I'm going to clean them out, but we're actually going to put them right back in. If I was doing a raised stencil on the doors, then I would leave them out just because it makes it a little bit easier. But in this case, I only took them off because I wanted that wire off, and they're easier to clean whenever they're out. So we're just going to clean both sides here. And then wipe the TSP back again. on top, I do actually have some paint specks. And we'll want to make sure that all of those definitely are off prior to painting, because they will leave, it's not that I couldn't paint over them, but they will leave, actually that may not be paint. I don't know what that is, but it would leave a mark. Like if it was paint, you would be able to see where that one spot, there was something under there. So I'm going to be sanding this though. But if I was painting it, I'd want to make sure that all of those were gone. In this case, I'm going to be sanding them right off, so I'm not going to take a lot of time to make sure I scrub all of them off. It looks like paint splatter. I'm not really sure what it is, but it will definitely sand off, and it's not something I have to worry about sanding into the actual wood itself. Because I'm sanding the top, I'm not too worried about it as getting it quite as clean as the rest of the piece. If I was not sanding, I would also rinse the residue off at this point, but it's not really necessary because I'm going to be sanding this entire finish off. The biggest thing is just getting it clean so you don't sand all the nasty stuff down in here. So now that I've got everything cleaned with the TSP, we're just going to go ahead and completely rinse it down with water. And we'll be drying that water off with a shop towel. And the reason I switched to shop towels at this stage is these do not leave lint. And you want to make sure that you don't have a bunch of lint on your piece whenever you are getting ready to paint it. Now, if you miss some of this and forget in a small area, I wouldn't worry about it. It's rare that you have enough buildup on here to really affect the paint job, but you don't want to take that risk, especially when you're spending so much time and money on the product, of leaving enough residue to really affect it on here. So you just want to dry it off. All right, perfect. So that's it. We're finished with cleaning. We're actually ready to go on to the next step. So this step is not necessary. Once you clean the top, you can just apply paint. You can also use a gel-based stain without sanding. I generally do sand the top in order to stain it, just because I like the look better, whether I'm using the no pain gel stain or the water-based voodoo gel stain. Here, when I'm sanding, I'm using a 120 grit sandpaper to start with. They generally recommend you start with an 80 grit sandpaper, work your way to a 120 grit, and then to a 220 grit. But I find in my experience that I like to start with a 120 grit first and then move to a 220 grit. Now, if it is a very thick manufacturer's almost glass-like original finish, then in those cases I will generally start with an 80 grit sandpaper. When I'm doing the edges here, I am using a 220 grit. There is a tool you can use to get around those curves a bit easier, but I generally just use my orbital sander here. Once I finish sanding, I'm just brushing off some of that excess dust with a large paintbrush. I'm not using a tack cloth or anything at this point because we are still going to do a scuff sand. And we'll talk about that in the priming video. In this case, I'm just putting back on our wood plates here onto the doors because there's nothing else that I need to do in that inside area.